Are you the one? You know, I happen to believe that God has an incredible purpose and plan for your life. And you know, it could begin as something insignificant as posting one question on your blog that launches you into an incredible ministry to help people within the body of Christ. Ann Jackson is such a person. Ann is the author of a book entitled Permission to Speak Freely. Is it really safe to share your faults, failures, sins in the church? Joining me now live is Ann Jackson. Ann, welcome to It's Your Call.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, it's our pleasure. And now, your home is in Nashville, correct?
Yes.
Now, Nashville because of friends, or is it the music?
I guess both. I have friends in music here. It's a town that never sleeps, so it's a very, very fun, very beautiful place to live.
Wow. Now, you're married, obviously.
Yes.
Okay. Now, does hubby, is he, I'm reading your book, is your hubby in a band? Does he play music?
He does write and record music. He was in a band when we met, but he just writes and records solo now. So just mainly stuff you can buy online. He doesn't tour because he can't play all the parts live, but he plays everything, you know, guitar, keys, every little piece. It's all instrumental now.
Wow. Well, you know, Ann, I'm really glad that you've been willing to join with us. And I want to talk in a few moments about the liberating freedom there is in confession. But first, you've got to tell us sort of your story in a Reader's Digest form, because it's an incredible story that you write about in the book. So can you take us back to growing up in a Southern Baptist preacher's home?
Sure. I grew up, my dad became a pastor when I was 5 years old, and grew up in various small, very rural farming communities in West Texas, and saw a lot of things happen. You know, we would learn stuff in Sunday school. We'd read our Bibles and learn about, you know, God is love and the fruits of the Spirit and all the good things you do learn in Sunday school.
Yeah.
But then I would see people act completely opposite of what I was learning in church. And even at a young age, I saw that disconnect, and it really troubled me a bit. So I grew up a little bit. We changed churches several times, and by the time I'm 16, my dad is pastoring his last church that he will ever pastor. He is yet to go back into ministry, and it's been 14 years now, so I'm 30 years old now.
Okay.
And he left the ministry right before my junior year of high school. It was a very ugly political business meeting that you know, people were accusing him of things that weren't true, and just fighting and lying and screaming, and it was just very, very nasty, very ugly. And so he resigned, and we moved from these small West Texas towns to Dallas, Texas, which went from a very small farming community to a city of 7 million people, essentially.
Wow.
And I was just, you know, I was hurt because of what had happened to my family.
Yeah.
I was a little bit in culture shock because I have never grown up with all of these billboards and signs and the music and the TV. We didn't have any of that when I was growing up. And I felt very hurt by God as well. You know, how could God let this happen to my family? And so I turned my back on him, essentially, and started more into the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle that Dallas had to offer. I mean, it was very available. I was very curious and definitely rebelling at that time. And starting to build up all of these secrets that eventually I would think, you know, there was no place for me to confess them.
Okay. So you were 16 when this all began to happen, when you moved to Dallas?
Yes.
Okay. Now, just a question. Before you moved to Dallas, your home was in the southern part of the States. Is that correct?
Yep. Kind of west and southern. We lived in just more, it's very rural, very farming communities. So. Okay.
Now, is it, you mentioned about you saw people live one way and yet say something else that was contrary to what the Scriptures teach.
Yes.
And you mentioned in your book it was hard to talk about things, like the church didn't want to hear stuff. And if they did it, then it was almost like as if, you know, if you confess anything, then you're almost rejected and thrown out of the church. I mean, was that the mentality of the southern area where you grew up in?
I think so, and I think, I mean, this is a very general statement, so not all churches are like this, but
right.
in most of the ones that I had spent time in growing up, if you weren't perfect,
Okay.
something was wrong, you would be judged because that meant there was something wrong with your walk with Jesus. The way that you dressed, the way that where you even sat in church, all depended on
Okay.
how big your house was going to be in heaven.
I see. I gotcha. So the judgmental thing was pretty huge that affected you as a teenager and affected obviously your family, your dad, ministry. So you got out of there.
Absolutely. It was terrible to not be able to even just ask innocent questions or to be able to. I didn't get really a sexual education. They didn't teach sex ed in my school because it was so conservative, and it was just a public school. But the culture, not just religiously, but just the geographic culture was very conservative, and
Yeah.
I didn't get the birds and the bees talks from my parents, and so sex wasn't something that we talked about.
Okay.
Politics, you definitely don't talk about politics.
Okay.
And any questions about the Bible, not that, I would question the Bible, but just ask, why did Jesus say this or what was going on here? Well, it just happened that way. That was always the answer.
I see.
You were showing a weakness in your faith, I think, if you asked questions.
Okay. So that then, when you moved to Dallas, that led you to rebel, turn your back on God,
Yeah.
and you began to just enter a whole other world. Talk to us about
Yeah.
that world for a minute.
Yeah, it really started with a very inappropriate relationship that I had with a youth pastor, of all people.
Okay.
At the time, I didn't realize exactly what was going on, but I had met a youth pastor who was 25 years old, and I was 16, and we formed this dating romantic relationship, and it turned very physical, and that was my introduction to a lot of things there. Just sexually, but that also, because I didn't have a lot of sexual education,
Okay.
it took me to the internet because I had questions about stuff, I didn't understand how everything worked, and so I thought very innocently, I need to know about this, and so I looked up sex on the internet, and something inside me just clicked, and little did I know that one internet search would actually begin to turn into an addiction to online porn and chat rooms, and eventually, living out those experiences in my offline life as well.
Wow.
That all started right, when I was ending my junior year of high school, which is when I graduated, and moved out, got my own apartment, and had all the freedom in the world at that point. So, I didn't realize it. In hindsight, I see it now, but I was medicating all of this hurt, and I did it by having relationships with men. I did it by drinking and abusing prescription drugs. Anything that would take away the pain that was left by my past and that I wasn't seeking help to get over.
Yeah.
I would just try and cover up the shame and the pain that I was feeling.
Wow. Now, I'm sure you've had this question asked you or comment given to you, but a female addicted to porn? Isn't that usually a guy thing?
Yeah. Normally people do think it's a guy's problem, and I think more and more it's becoming a little bit more discussed in culture, which I think is fantastic. But, even just 5 years ago, I wrote an article about my addiction to porn, and it was, the response to it was very, very huge because nobody had really talked about it in a public way before. And it's expected almost for guys to have issues with their sexuality or to act out on those, but for a girl, who talks about that?
Yeah.
But statistically, 1 in 3 porn viewers are women, and that number is growing very rapidly. And the age that girls and boys get exposed to porn is become. I was exposed at 16, but I was speaking with some friends of mine who are parents, and they have an 8-year-old daughter who has been looking up things on the internet, and
Wow.
they are just shocked and confused on what to do. So
Wow.
it's becoming something very, very common.
Yeah. So there was the porn, the promiscuity, and then there was drugs too. You got involved in drugs as well?
Yeah, it wasn't anything illegal or like hard street drugs
Right.
or anything, but because of all the stuff that I was doing, and I was working a lot, and just the stress of carrying around all those secrets, I became very anxious, and so I went to see a doctor and got prescribed some anti-anxiety medicine, and was in a car accident, so had some painkillers, and instead of taking them as I needed to take them, I would mix them and combine them with alcohol in order to get high off them or to just pass out. Some nights it was the only way I could get to sleep was to drink have some Captain Morgan rum and take a Xanax, which you're not supposed to do that
Wow.
together. It's very dangerous.
Yeah.
But that's how I would sleep at night, and then wake up and have a little bit more of alcohol in the morning so I didn't have a hangover, and go to work and
Wow.
be completely functioning the next day.